It's not as strong as to call it a civil war. You and Tucker have been kind of going back and forth on Israel, who's right, and that kind of thing, and it's gotten a little personal on his end a couple of times.
And I don't think Ben Shapiro's like evil. I'm not attacking him as a person. But how much better would it be if he could just sit and say, okay, here's what I think would happen if we joined an attack on Iran?
I mean, a bit of an astonishing statement there from Tucker. I would never doubt his love for the country, even though he and I disagree wildly about a number of topics. First of all, he attributes to me a bunch of things that simply are not true.
I've never taken a dollar from any government. I mean, are you joking? And these are people who are acting on behalf of a foreign government telling me that I'm unpatriotic. And
if anybody has listened to my show, which has a few listeners, over the course of the last several months, you'll see that I talk about all the issues that he mentions there, including the border issue, all the time.
It's Clash of the Titans, the unstoppable object versus the immovable post. We're talking, of course, about a civil war brewing, or at least a bit of rivalry in the alt-right world of big influencers. Ben Shapiro on one side, Tucker Carlson on the other. I'm Mediaite founding editor Colby Hall, and with me is editor-in-chief Aidan McLaughlin. Aidan, is that your name, Aidan?
You got it right.
Aidan.
Yeah, after all these
Not
years,
Jaden.
you finally got my name right.
Can I call you Hayden?
No, I hate when you call me Hayden. The H is horrible. Anyway.
Tucker and Ben are sort of heroes on the far right, right? They're alt-right, independent media, kind of game-changing figures, you know, both of which were featured prominently on Fox News. Of course, Tucker Carlson hosted the top-rated 8 p.m. hour there for a long time. And they're both pro-MAGA, pro-Trump, and in different sort of ways. Lately, there seems to be a pretty bitter fight between the two. And that's not something you typically see, like Republican on Republican violence, but these two don't agree and seem to not like one another. Explain to me, like I'm a 5-year-old, as you see it, what's going on here?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think everyone knows about the evolution of Tucker Carlson, which is really the thing that has fueled this feud, I would say, over the years. You know, Tucker started out as a pretty traditional conservative writer and journalist. He was actually a great journalist. If you go back and read some of his stories that he wrote for Esquire, right. Really, really brilliant writer. And at the time, you know, he was sort of a bow-tied, traditional, you know, Heritage Foundation conservative.
Right.
And that was, 20 years ago. He had some heterodox views. I don't want to give him short shrift and just pretend that he was, sort of a cookie cutter, National Review conservative. He did have some heterodox views, but for the most part, he wasn't the person that we know today, which a lot of people would consider an extremist. And he sort of languished in the sort of B-side of cable news for years. He got fired from CNN. He got fired from MSNBC. And then on Fox News, he was on Fox and Friends Weekend, which is really not the best time slot on the network. It's not considered to be a particularly good one. But he got plucked out of that time slot when Bill O'Reilly was fired from Fox News. And he eventually made his way to the 9 p.m. hour at Fox, right, which is a really, really serious hour on the network. And he had long been a favorite of Rupert Murdoch, who founded the network with Roger Ailes. And that's why he was put into that position, and he was sort of given this chance. And over the years, pretty quickly, he became the top-rated host in all of cable news. And the irony for Rupert Murdoch is that he did so by taking contrarian views and sometimes extreme views and conspiracy-laden views of subjects that were pretty much everyone agreed on the common wisdom. The war in Ukraine, which Rupert Murdoch is very much in support of Ukraine against Russia in that war. So much so that the New York Post, another paper that he owns, had a Ukrainian flag along with an American flag on its cover for forever. I'm not sure if they still have that. But Tucker Carlson challenged that and became, during his time at Fox, certainly probably one of the more, America First members of the MAGA movement, which is really isolationist, contrarian, opposed to funding foreign wars, whether it's the war in Ukraine or whether it's funding Israel. And that has put him on the side, since leaving Fox, of more sort of libertarian-minded YouTubers like Dave Smith.
Right.
And so what we had this week is Dave Smith going on Tucker Carlson's show and them railing against foreign wars and U.S. support for foreign countries, which puts them in pretty direct opposition with people like Ben Shapiro, who is known as more of a neocon. and Douglas Murray, who was a big topic of this interview that they had.
Right. So basically, it seems like Tucker and Dave Smith are ostensibly isolationists. Their summed up argument is, why should the U.S. care about, we no longer want to be the America's police force, right?
Whereas people like Ben Shapiro, and I would argue that it's Tucker Carlson who has changed, not Ben Shapiro, because Tucker Carlson supported the Iraq War. He now says, he's very open about the fact that he was wrong then. He now says that that was a colossal mistake. But Ben Shapiro and Douglas Murray are people who see the West as a power that needs to establish peace throughout the world through dominance, through war.
Right.
And Tucker Carlson has moved totally away from that view and now aligns himself with someone like Dave Smith, who is libertarian, but in a lot of ways could be seen as left wing on these issues.
Well, so Dave Smith is a comedian who has appeared on like Gutfeld, and he just sort of says whatever. And he appeared on a podcast with Douglas Murray, who's a frequent Fox News guest. I'm not sure if he's a contributor.
He's a contributor to the New York Post, I believe.
Right. And he's a very smart British guy who basically made a lot of hay when he went on Rogan and kind of called out Dave Smith for what Dave Smith was doing. And what a lot of people do on Rogan was they just ask questions. And it's something that Tucker gets criticized for. Like, you're not really criticizing, but by asking questions from a underinformed point of view, you undermine the authority or expertise of people who actually know what they're talking about. And Douglas Murray, I think, sort of pretty bravely called BS on all of that and said, like, wait a second, you're doing this again. Like, you guys don't know. Joe Rogan and that whole clutch of friends, I mean, what's appealing about that is that it's a conversational, like, we're just shooting the crap. Like, we don't know. But it's a dangerous thing if you don't do it responsibly, right? And if you just throw out all these sort of conspiracy theories. And so what you have is this weird dividing line, as I see it. Dave Smith was on with Tucker Carlson, and they basically took turns just railing on Ben Shapiro and Douglas Murray, who weren't there, of course, to defend themselves in a way that it was kind of shocking, right? And this has been brewing, but it seems to be breaking out wide in the open.
Yeah, and I'm of two minds about the Douglas Murray Dave Smith debate on Joe Rogan that has fueled all of this. On the one hand, I agree with the spirit of what Douglas Murray said on Joe Rogan's show, which is that you have this massive platform. You can't have people on your show who have no idea what they're talking about to sit there and just spew nonsense. Right. I think, there's a responsibility if you're someone like Joe Rogan, you have the platform that you have, to not have Alex Jones come on and say that the vaccine is, the semen of the Antichrist. And like those sorts of things are, irresponsible to platform, to use the sort of hackneyed term that everyone uses these days. On the other hand, I don't think that Douglas Murray has any sort of expertise on this either. His biggest argument against Dave Smith, which you could have seen coming because, I watch a lot of Douglas Murray. I read a lot of his work. And he very often brings out this argument that he asked Dave Smith if he had ever been to Israel or Palestine. And, that's now become a bit of a meme because of how he said it. He's got this sort of like posh public school accent. And what I found, I knew it was coming. I think he knew that Dave Smith had never been there, despite expressing, feigning shock that when he replied that he had never been there. The argument is ridiculous. I mean, I could draw an arbitrary line anywhere. I could say to Douglas Murray, you can't opine on the war because you don't speak Arabic or Hebrew.
So you're not allowed to speak about things that you've read about. You can only speak about things that you've seen with your own eyes.
You can talk about what you want, as you're proving. But that is a different matter from spending an awfully long amount of time talking about an issue in a region you haven't even had the courtesy to visit whilst developing all of these views about it. I mean, now I slightly get an idea of where you're coming from. You've read about this blockade, and so you imagine that that's what it is. I imagine you've read all the people who say that Gaza was a concentration camp, and you probably think that too.
Yeah, have you memorized the Torah? You haven't?
You haven't? Oh, then I can't take your opinion seriously. Or, Douglas Murray, and Douglas Murray's point was that if you spend a good deal amount of time talking about a place, you owe it the respect of visiting and hearing from the people there. Douglas Murray has been to Israel to receive an award from Benjamin Netanyahu to go on an IDF guided tour of Gaza, to where he took these very dramatic photos of himself wearing a flak jacket standing on rubble. He came back and defended the war. I don't think that a state-sponsored trip to a place, I doubt he met with anyone in the West Bank.
Well, it was like a junket. It was a junket designed to win him over.
He talks about Iran all the time. He's never been to Iran. He talks about Sudan. He's never been to Sudan. So yeah, the idea that we're all empiricists, that I have to be I have to travel to the Great Wall of China to know it exists, is ridiculous. So that would be my criticism to Douglas Murray here. And that was an argument that Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith really put forward on that front. The problem is, and this was a really interesting part of the Tucker Carlson Dave Smith conversation about this, is that Tucker Carlson at one point says that he believes that Douglas Murray's career is over, that no one will ever respect him again, that he humiliated himself so much in this interview that he's done forever.
I saw that and read the commentary after, and as someone who's always liked Douglas and known him for a while, my first instinct was, wow, he just destroyed his career. Like, he's done. No smart person will ever take Douglas seriously again. And I don't know if he felt that way, but it was clear by a day or two after he realized he destroyed his career. And in response, rather than admitting that and admitting what he'd done wrong, he attacked you, really kind of doubled down in the New York Post. I want to read this because I was offended by this. He goes, the whole column's an attack on you, and I'm quoting, claiming some Jewish ancestry, Smith has spent the last 18 months since October 7th being very unfunny. Indeed.
That, I think, is total nonsense. And the reason is that these debates, there are no winners, because after a debate like this happens, it doesn't matter who actually won on the substance, right? Let's say we were to grade it like a boxing bout and to say, oh, this person won on the merits. That doesn't matter, because Dave Smith goes back to his audience and they all applaud him and say, you did a great job. You crushed him. You owned him. And Douglas Murray goes back to his audience and they all say the same thing. So both figures are playing to an audience who tells them that they've won. And because we don't live in a monoculture anymore, where a large audience is not watching this, you win anything. It doesn't matter anymore, which is, I think, very, very bad for the discourse.
Well, put it another way, there's no shared experience, right? So, like, everyone is narrow casting to their own group. I mean, I would say the big winner of this is Dave Smith, who went from like kind of an also-ran comedian guest on Gutfeld to a guy who's like suddenly been elevated as a thought leader when he's just a comedian who admittedly doesn't know what he's talking about, but is now being feted by Tucker Carlson and fighting. Like, Douglas Murray is basically punching down, and by doing so, bringing him up. What's very interesting to me is that, side note, Tucker Carlson comes from like sort of American, Swanson's wealth royalty, so to speak. And Douglas Murray is very much like a posh establishment, sort of London, well-regarded patrician, kind of condescending, cocksure point of view. And it seems like those two are almost battling over who's like, no, I'm the guy that represents the establishment that's turning against and not being populist. And it's a weird game. Meanwhile, Ben Shapiro is basically just saying, he's pretty fervently in support of Israel, right? And one of the things that was interesting to me was that Dave Smith blasted Ben Shapiro for Ben Shapiro's always against pronouns and identity politics. And, I think he was ahead of the curve on that, but saying that he identifies as a, pro-Zionist Jew, and then saying, well, that makes you an identity person also. And that, in some way, equating kind of like this obsession with, who he is and who he believes with gender pronouns.
But there's a difference between that and your entire foundation being built on hypocrisy. And that hypocrisy being shown. Look, I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? Ben Shapiro built a career opposing identity politics as a proud Zionist.
Yeah.
Now feel however you feel about Zionism. It's identity politics. Like that is the definition of you could not find a better example of a politics built on an identity. And yet you're out here saying facts don't care about your feelings. Identity politics is wrong. And then while you're saying that, your number one priority is this manifestation of identity politics.
It's like, that was a pretty big leap, and I think sort of suggests that Dave Smith's not ready to play at this level, because I think, yes, of course, that's who he identifies as, but that's a very different thing. That's like comparing today's culture war to, incredibly complicated, complex issue of the Middle East that's been going on for decades, if not centuries.
I do think that there is a bizarre trend in this country where people that oppose the identity politics that liberals were obsessed with over the last decade, that really peaked in 2020, have a carve out for the way that they view that when it comes to Israel. For example, we heard endlessly about how college campuses were cauldrons of woke thought where you couldn't say the wrong thing,
right?
Lest you be banished or your speech be canceled. And now college students are being disappeared to ICE detention centers for writing pro-Palestine op-eds. I mean, okay, either you have free speech for everyone, or you only have free speech for opinions that you agree with.
Right.
And I think there's an enormous amount of hypocrisy among the people who shouted about how, there was this huge crackdown on free speech, and then they have this massive carve out for this foreign country that you dare not criticize. So I do think that is notable. I also, one of the things that Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith talk about in their interview is apparently Douglas Murray referred to Dave Smith as having claimed some Jewish ancestry. And Dave Smith is Jewish. Both his parents are Jewish. He's Ashkenazi Jewish. And the idea that you have I assume that Douglas Murray is Protestant, some sort of Christian, a Christian person defending Israel by accusing a Jewish person of not being Jewish enough.
Yeah.
Is we're down the identity politics rabbit hole. And I think it's a good point that your identity should not matter. It should not matter, and once we've gotten to the point where, criticizing a foreign country gets you labeled an anti-Semite, and if you're Jewish gets you labeled some sort of religion traitor, we are in really dangerous territory. And I think everyone should take a step back and remember that free speech as a principle should apply to people that you disagree with.
Right.
Because otherwise, when the next administration gets into power and they decide that you can't criticize Liberia and you'll get sent to a gulag if you do, you're not going to be happy with that.
Depends upon the gulag. I've heard some very nice things about some of the gulag.
Did you see Rachel Campos Duffy, the Fox News host, was touring, was it an ICE detention center yesterday? And she said, wow, this is better than most high schools.
I mean, so zooming back out at the sort of political theater of all this, right? Like less about the semiotics of identity and the issues at hand. It seems sort of odd to me that Tucker Carlson has gone from a guy that had all the juice in the world is now spending a lot of time on his podcast, sort of I would say punching down at Ben Shapiro. And it seems like in the sort of kayfabe political theater of this, is Tucker taking the bait? Is he feeling territorial? It just seems like he's marginalizing himself by, vengeance. Because, Ben Shapiro sort of shot back during Megyn Kelly at Tucker, and Tucker can't let it just go. It seems as though he would have larger fish to fry when he's going after, and of course Tucker says well, I like Ben Shapiro, we agree on a lot of things, but then he derides him. Well, there's a lot I don't agree with him on, and da-da-da-da-da. And so, but it seems to me that Ben Shapiro kind of comes out better from all of this from a, I don't know, influencer point of view. But again, it's maybe too soon to say. What's your take?
Well, I think that, first of all, I don't think Tucker Carlson's punching down, because if you remember on his Fox News show, he stopped it a little bit towards the end, but at the beginning, his Fox News show really got known for him inviting on liberals who were not very bright and embarrassing them.
Right.
So he would invite on some liberal and just, some liberal college kid to, claim that something ridiculous, and then he'd destroy him because Tucker Carlson's an incredibly erudite and smart debater and orator. So, that's kind of Tucker's bread and butter. So, and now that he's in the independent media world, I mean, the independent media world thrives on conflict between the creators that inhabit it.
Right.
And if you can get someone with 5 million subscribers on YouTube to respond to you, that's a win.
Well, here we are talking about it.
Here we are talking about it. It's Piers Morgan has basically created the Jerry Springer show on YouTube,
right? And
it's been enormously successful for him.
Right.
Megyn Kelly pretty much exclusively these days traffics in outrage,
right?
And
he's very good at it. If that's what you're looking for, she nails it.
And a lot of people are looking for that. So I do think that Tucker Carlson is smart to gin up these kind of conflicts because not only does it make headlines, but people want to watch this kind of stuff for better or for worse. So, at the end of the day, I think it's smart for him, particularly someone like Ben Shapiro, who I think they have different audiences, but he's still within the pro-Trump tent. So it creates a little bit more drama than if he were just taking on, a liberal commentator.
So that brings me to a thing that I heard recently that I thought was pretty smart. It was David Pakman, who's a liberal YouTube influencer. I was like, he's not quite that level, but he's a rare liberal success, progressive success in the YouTube influence world. He made a point that like conservatives play really well in the outrage game because their messages are really, really simple. And you ask someone about, say, abortion rights, whatever that may be, and many pro-life people are like, it's killing babies. Boom. And David Pakman made a point like, what's that?
Build the wall.
Right. Really simple. And, from his perspective, progressives are like, well, it's nuanced. It depends upon whether this, that, or the other thing.
Yeah.
And like, that's not sloganeering. And I think you see with like Midas Touch, you see with David Pakman, you see a few liberals, but in this like influencer, like YouTube independent media world, does it skew towards the conservatives that are like, are they more fervent in their beliefs? Is it just more simple sloganeering, or just progressives just soft and they don't know how to get their communication?
Well, I've always thought that conservatives have a massive leg up when it comes to going independent. And my theory for why that is the case is that liberals already own the mainstream media.
Right.
I mean, if 90% of journalists are liberal. I don't know if that stat, I don't know how that stat's ever been calculated. And so I don't know how realistic it is, but knowing people that work in the media, they tend to be pretty liberal, particularly.
I mean, anecdotally, I would say 90% of the people I know that work at the cable networks or newspapers, they're responsible journalists, but they're reasoned, fact-based people, but typically are like center lefty to lefty.
Yeah. And I think, the things that attract people to journalism tend to be found in more liberal-minded people. I mean, it certainly doesn't find itself in people that would be supportive of Trump, who kind of represents the antithesis of the goal of journalism, right? So I think liberals have their networks. If you are a liberal and you vote Democrat, you have MSNBC, you have CNN, you have ABC, you have NBC, you have CBS, you have the New York Times, you have the Washington Post, you have the BBC, you have the Guardian. You can read a million different news sources that are all very well funded, have talent, have newsrooms behind them. If you are conservative, you have Fox News. And so
Newsmax.
You've got Newsmax, you've got OAN, there are a couple. But there's also, in addition to, I think, the fact that just like the mainstream media is overwhelmingly geared towards liberal audiences, there's also the fact that conservatives are drawn towards personalities, I think, more so than liberals are. I couldn't say why, but if you have a personality on a conservative network, I think they will have a much better shot of building an audience and having a direct relationship with that audience than a liberal would be on a mainstream network.
Yeah, I think if you look at talent across the spectrum, most of the cable news host personalities that have their own audience they can take with them or they are all conservative. The personality, like Wolf Blitzer's not, he's a talent, but he doesn't have a built-in audience.
No.
It's hard to, maybe that's the problem with like the ratings at MSNBC. I mean, Joe Scarborough kind of
I think,
did.
I think some of the more opinion hosts could do it. Rachel Maddow, I think if she left MSNBC
Definitely.
right now, she could get a couple million subscribers off
100%.
of that. And that would be a healthy $10 million in revenue company if she was able to do that. So, yeah, I think the opinion folks would have a better time. But, conservatives, they tune into personalities more, I would say.
Well, we started with the Clash of the Titans, and we ended up with the semiotics of influencers. And I think we did a good job. Good conversation, Jaden.
Thanks, Colby. That was
All
fun.
right, good stuff.
All right.